Cam wanted to wear girl sense, and I had a problem with that. So I had some sort of bias, and I talked about that. Like, why do I have this bias? And people are like, I can't believe you're admitting that publicly, but I'm really glad you do, because it's something that I also have a bias. You know, I also struggle with this, but nobody talks about it. And I'm like, well, why is it bad? Why is it bad that I don't know something? Or why is it bad that I say that I wonder about this, or I don't know why I react this way, or, you know, things, I want to explore things that are a little bit more difficult. And people are like, so glad you said something.
It seems like everybody on Facebook and Twitter, everybody is an expert on gender.
Oh, for sure.
I very, very rarely see anybody on social media ever say, and this doesn't matter if they're a big account or small account, Twitter account, YouTube account, doesn't matter. Everybody has an opinion on gender. Everybody claims, like, they talk like they are biologists. Oh, well, don't you know that according to biology, blah, blah, blah. It's like, there is no way that this quantity of people are experts on biology. There's just no way. It's just not possible. It's just not. But everybody has, I very ever rarely see people say, I really don't know. I don't know. Is like, what is the consensus on gender in biology?
No idea. I'm just like,
I mean, even like, let's say, even the person who says, oh, well, there's two genders. Okay, explain that.
Yeah.
What? Tell me the science behind this. Explain to me the genome and the chromosome. Explain to me in detail everything. Yeah, let's see how far they get. Let's see how detailed they get. Ask them some difficult questions. Let's see if they can answer it. They don't. Like, it's not just about like saying some vagary, right? Like, you have to actually be able to understand this stuff. I can't tell you what the truth is. So I'm not even going to try. There's plenty of people out there, online even, with YouTube channels or Twitter accounts who are experts in this. Go ask them. People never want to ask those people. They think like they know everything, or they go to somebody who is an anti-social justice warrior who says, you know, free speech on college campuses, and then they're asking that person about, you know, is there two genders or not? And that person
confirmation bias too.
And that person is not an expert on biology. Just said, well, I like that person, and I think they're smart.
And yeah, they'll know.
Yeah, don't ask me about that. Nobody asked me about it. I don't know. I'm the biggest idiot in the world on that subject. I don't know. I don't get involved in biology and science for the most part. Practically none.
I know I've come so far as to say, if somebody says that they're a girl and they're not, I mean, you know, but they say that they're a girl, then that's fine. They're a girl. I'm not going to argue that. I don't know. People want to argue about the biology and whether that's, the whole trans arguments that I've seen, or lesbians aren't allowed to date girls anymore, or they have to be attracted to trans women, or some kind of problem there it's bigoted. I don't know. I don't know.
My limit of understanding was that little kid in Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Remember that movie? Where he gets up and he's like, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. That's all I know. And a bunch of ex-girlfriends would tell you that I don't even know that much. But no, I don't know enough. And but the thing is, I also don't trust in, like, the majority of people out there who are acting like they know. You don't know either. I'm smart. I don't know about that subject, but I'm smart enough a person to know who is an expert on a subject. I know, like, how the questions to ask and how they respond, and I know a little bit enough maybe to get a grasp of this person and what they're talking about. They know what they're talking about or not, right?
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't care enough.
Well, you can't care on every subject. Like, hey, climate change is a really important issue, but it's not my issue. Like, do I care to some degree? Yes. Do I care enough that it's my issue that I'm diving into the science every day? I'm not. I can't. Like, I just can't care about every issue. It's like emotionally and psychologically impossible to do that. You just can't.
It would make me crazy.
Like, does gender and gender equality and trans rights matter? Yes. Do I care enough to spend like my day researching it? No, I can't. I'm involved in like tons of other issues, right? I'm involved in like trying to like create awareness for FGM, North Korea, Venezuela. You know, I do a podcast with people who survive religious cults. I do what I can for certain subjects. There's a million billion different oppressions and problems out there. You know, to act like, oh, I care enough that I'm going to be an activist in every subject. And people do act like that. Have you noticed?
Yeah, they do.
There are people who act like they are activists for every subject in the world. And that's just not possible. You can't do that.
You can't. If you're going to be a real activist, no.
Activist is the most vacuous term used today in the world, I think. Like, people have not talked about this, but I feel like activist is meaningless now. Everybody is an activist. Everybody
I won't call myself one now.
I won't call myself that either. I don't have activists on my Twitter account, and I don't talk about myself that way. And if somebody says I'm an activist, I say I'm not. To me, an activist is a person who is part of or runs an organization and is creating like real sustainable change somewhere, some foundation going somewhere, Doctors Without Borders, or organizing a march or something like that. I do a podcast where I try to talk with somebody. Some people might argue that's a kind of activism. I don't really consider it to be. But I've seen some people who have nothing, barely tweet, don't do anything online, and then they're presented on a podcast or even a lecture in a university, and they're presented as an activist. And I know for a fact that person does nothing. Nothing. But it's just a vacuous term. It's like, oh, what are you? Well, they don't really do anything. So, well, what do we call a person who we want to present as, you know, talking about an issue, but is not an expert on it, doesn't have degrees in it, and is not really doing anything about it? Let's call him an activist. That's what I noticed this word means now. It's just, it's a word to call somebody when you don't know what to call them.
Because they talk online.
Yes. Like, even like, let's say someone I don't even like Linda Sarsour. I don't like what she says. I don't like her opinions. I don't like how nasty she is with people, but she is an activist. Absolutely. She's part of the Women's March, which has huge outreach and political reach. She's an activist, right? She's an activist for a lot of things I don't like, but she is. Definitely.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Like, I don't do the kind of things I don't think I would be involved in the kind of things she does. I wouldn't want to be linked to a political group. Because then you're kind of responsible for what you say. Because if you say something wrong, they're going to be held responsible for it. It's a mess. I like being independent. But no, activist is just a vacuous term now. I'm very suspicious when somebody says they're an activist. Like, what have you done?
Comedian.
What have you done?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you go out into the real world and do activism, or do you just give your opinion online and call it activism?
But see, the funny thing, Jen, is like there's even some people with like really large Twitter accounts that you could say they're activists to some degree because they have such a big following. They bring some awareness to some issues. I guess maybe you could call that person an activist. I wouldn't really. But there's some people I see, Jen, who have no following at all, right? Like 100 followers on Twitter. Don't tweet at all, really. Barely. Don't do much of anything, even online. And then they're like interviewed for some reason on some podcast, and they're just presented as, well, we're going to talk with an activist. What? Okay.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Or all they do is argue and just constantly argue with people online and don't actually present any kind of information to change minds or change the world. They just pick subjects to argue with people about and call themselves an activist.
That is so typical now. People who get on Twitter, fight with everybody, and they call that activism. No.
It's like at least I try. When I was tweeting out original pictures of Muhammad, to say that in the 17th and 18th centuries, it kind of became a thing where you wouldn't produce pictures of Muhammad. But prior to that, is quite common, not just in Shia, the Shia sect. It's not something that they can. It's kind of a new thing. So I was showing different pictures of Muhammad, and people are like thank you for sharing this information. Like, it's something that it's teaching people. And when I say things about Islam, I try to remember that there's people reading it that don't really know about Islam. So I try to explain things. And that's not even activism, but that it's like I'm trying to teach people things instead of just arguing online, because arguing online doesn't do anything to begin with. But it's like, I want to change minds. I want to change the world. I want people to understand. I don't know why. I feel driven. There's no, when I think about it, I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? I don't know, because I'm stupid. But I don't know. I don't think it's activism per se, but maybe in some people's minds. It just annoys me that if you argue online, you can call yourself an activist.
Yes. We see you. Wrong. Those fake activists out there, we see you. We see you. We see what you're doing. So let's talk today about identity. Let's do the identity. Yeah. So me and Jennifer were both recently on a podcast called The Mythicists Milwaukee.
I can't say
it's Mythicist Milwaukee. Mythicist Milwaukee. The Mythicist Milwaukee. It's the worst thing ever.
It's so hard to say. Tongue twisters.
I can never spell Milwaukee on top of that. Every time I Google it, I'm like, God damn, how do you spell that? Milwaukee shit. Anyway, we were both on this podcast. I think just 2 weeks apart or something, maybe a week apart.
Yeah.
But when I was on, I was very surprised by a question that I really hadn't been asked that, let's say, that directly before. And they asked me, so Lalo, don't you think that identity is completely irrelevant? That the only thing that matters is what somebody has as far as their degree? Not who they are, not their skin color, not where they're from. And they gave an example of if a mother was giving birth, you would just, and I think they gave the wrong kind of doctor, right? You pointed that out?
Yeah, gynecologist.
Right, kind of, they said a gynecologist, which is not the person who delivers the baby. But aside from that, they said like you would just want like the doctor to help deliver it. It doesn't matter what color of skin they are. And I hadn't thought about the question, but I immediately had to say, no, I don't agree with that. And I just couldn't agree with that because that would discard most of the episodes of my podcast. And I actually do appreciate people's identity to a certain degree. For example, I've had people on my podcast purely based on where they're from. I don't know their opinions. I haven't talked to them before. I don't know what degrees they have. I don't know if they've written books. I don't know anything about that. All I know is where they're from. That's it. For example, after a university student was killed in Pakistan, Mashal Khan, for blasphemy in his university, hundreds of students came in, grabbed him, big mob, killed him. Right? There was a person who followed me from Pakistan and wanted to talk to me about blasphemy in Pakistan. And I interviewed him. I didn't know anything about this person, except that they were atheists and Pakistani and lived in Pakistan. That's the only thing I knew about this person. And all their identity. No idea about their opinions. I don't know what they're an expert on. And it was fascinating. What is it to be an atheist your whole life in Pakistan? Right? And that's, to this day, Jen, that's the only podcast I did with somebody who's anonymous.
Oh, really?
That's the only one I did. That's the only one I've done with somebody who was anonymous. And
you kind of have to be about
this. I mean, yeah. I mean, we're talking about a country where if people find out you're an atheist, and if you do blasphemy, they will come in mobs and they will kill you. So yeah. he just, but here's the thing. He wasn't anonymous to me. To me, when we spoke privately outside the podcast, he told me his name. He was on video. He introduced me to his wife on video, said, this is my wife. She's also an atheist. Showed me his home, showed me books. for example, books, Pakistani books for schools on English and mathematics, and on the first page it had Quran verses, and he's saying all these books come from Saudi Arabia. All these things I couldn't show in the podcast because I can't show his home or his face.
Right.
But he was actually very happy and insistent to be on video with me when we started talking. Actually, he was just like, he wanted to be on video with me. He's like, I always have to be anonymous online. Always, always, always. So it's so nice that I can actually show myself and my family and my wife to somebody. He was really happy about it. And he would speak with a really thick accent, right? Like full life living in Pakistan. I would say I can understand about like 90% of everything he says in my own podcast. It's pretty hard, but it's good enough that I understood, and it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. But that was just identity, right? And I couldn't agree with the guys from Milwaukee.
Well, they're wrong anyway, because there are race differences in gestation period. I worked in midwifery, delivering babies and in nursing, and absolutely there are some racial differences. I mean, and ethnicities. You know, you have to treat, Pakistani and Asian meaning Indian, Desi, differently as far as their pregnancy goes than you would like a Caucasian British woman. There is a difference. There are slight differences, but there's differences in gestational diabetes.
Oh, you're talking about biological differences between them. Yeah,
because he said you would just treat every baby the same. It doesn't matter what skin color, but that's not true. Because the pregnancies do differ based on ethnicity.
Oh, he said that? I didn't even catch that. He said that?
What?
That you would treat every baby the same.
That's what when he said like identity doesn't matter. The baby coming out would be it's all the same. The pregnancy is true, or the delivery of the baby is the same, right?
That's what he said. Same?
No.
You've worked as a nurse, haven't you?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There are absolute differences in pregnancy between ethnicities. Some ethnicities and races carry babies to longer. Some have a higher risk of gestational diabetes. Some have a higher risk of weight gain. So, I mean, there's all sorts of different factors that go into pregnancy and delivery. And yes, there is a difference. How you treat the delivery based on a woman that has gestational diabetes is different than a delivery of a normal pregnancy. And that matters by ethnicity and race. That does change. Whether people want to admit that or not, that is an absolute fact.
Yeah, no, they're social constructs, didn't you know?
So even then, it doesn't make sense. Like, yes, identity
right. So
matters.
even his example didn't make sense, really.
Right.
Right. So I understand what he means. Like in that case, if I was sick, I would need a doctor. Right. That would be basically, it wouldn't matter what color skin my doctor was. I wouldn't choose him based on whether he's black or white. I just, if I have a
if he's
heart
qualified,
pain,
that's all that matters.
If he's qualified, right.
Yeah.
But to say that example therefore leads to identity doesn't matter, I didn't agree with, because where a person was raised and their experience, that matters. Like if you grow up in Chile or Pakistan or the US, those are very different experiences, and they're interesting to know how people were raised. And I've lived in a few countries. I've seen how drastically different realities are. It makes me more interested to know other people's reality. And even within a country, what gender you are, what race you are, what religion you are, what political branch you belong to, which could be which you usually adopt from your parents anyway. All kinds of things. Those are purely identity, and they really define your reality in a country, right? What is it to be a Jew in Iran, right? What is it to be a Christian in Egypt?
Absolutely.
All those things are fascinating. And here's the thing, Jen, I hadn't told you this, but really think about it. Even though the guys in Mississippi, Milwaukee, they don't really believe that, because they've interviewed tons of ex-Muslims based on solely their identity. I know for a fact, all the ex-Muslims they've talked to on their podcasts, none of them have degrees in Islamic studies or theology. They interview them solely based on their personal experience and their identity. Right. You're an ex-Muslim identity, and you grew up in a Muslim family in this country and they asked them, what was your experience like? Not what you have a degree, like a doctor who delivers a baby. Where did you study? What degree do you have? Is it a postgraduate degree? What did you focus your thesis statement on? Do you hear those questions, Jen? I don't hear those questions. It's all about identity. But yes. I understand what they're talking about a little. What they mean more, to give them some credit, what they mean more, I think, is identity politics. And identity politics is different from identity, where you're making decisions on who you vote for, the laws you want passed, who your enemies are, or how you see the world in general, based on your identity, right? I'm going to vote for this candidate for president because she's a woman and I'm a woman.
Right.
I'm going to vote for that guy because he's black and I'm black, independent of what he thinks, how smart he is, what political positions he has. He's black, I'm voting for him. That's identity politics. But that's different from saying identity doesn't matter flat out. It just doesn't matter. Like that, I do not agree with. And I think people are taking it way too far if that's the point they're getting to. Identity absolutely does matter. It is interesting. What is it like to be black in the United States? I don't know. I understand like there's a lot of people who go way too far where they just say all the problems in their life is the product of white supremacy and white privilege. And, if I trip over a rock, it's white supremacy and the patriarchy or something. There are people who go that far, right? But it is different reality to be black in a country sometimes than white. And the thing is, you can never stop at experience alone, no matter who you're talking about on anything, right? Because if you talk to somebody, Jen, from Chile, if they have a hard left political leaning, for example, if they're very left and they're communists, right?
Right.
They're going to tell you that the economy in Chile is garbage and that everybody is poor, everybody is hungry. The rich are extremely rich and everybody is just living in extreme, dirt poor conditions because they have a political agenda.
Right.
Right. So if you only spoke to that person based on their identity, let's say, oh, they're Chilean, they must know. No, not everyone knows. Sometimes it's because of political ideology. Sometimes it's because of ignorance. Sometimes it's a very local position to take. If you spoke to somebody from the United States and they're from Texas and they're just like, well, in America, we live like this. And they're just like talking about pickup trucks, Christianity, they just.
And I'm in LA going, no, we
don't.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you heard a person describe their experience in Texas, you as a person growing up in LA, you don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So you have
people in trucks are cowboys.
Exactly. So when you talk to somebody, you have to talk, one, with a lot of people. And second, you have to contrast it with a bunch of other information, statistics. For example, if a person, like for example, in Chile, a major big issue, right, is teenage pregnancies. That's a very big issue in Chile. I've talked with people, girls, women, other people, who tell me that's not an issue in Chile. Why? Because they don't know any person who got pregnant as a teenager. But statistics tell you otherwise.
Right.
So they're not lying. They're just telling you their very personal point of view. So you have to be careful when you talk to somebody, contrast it about what quantity of the population that person is talking about. They could belong to 1%, 5%, or 90% of the population. So you have to take that into account. You have to contrast it with history, politics, a bunch of stuff, and see where that person falls into. Right? So identity doesn't matter, but you can't stop at identity and personal experience. You have to add more to it and get this is why if I had one conversation with one person about Islam on my podcast, I can't claim to know about Islam.
No, it's taken, like we've talked about, it's taken you a long time and a lot of interviews and a lot of research.
Oh, like reading tons of books, reading tons of politics, the news, history books, reading the theology, reading the Quran, conversations with dozens of people, ex-Muslims, Muslims from all over the world. And still, it's really hard to get a clearer picture of Islam in the world.
And you're still doing it. Like now you're looking at Muhammad's life. So you're still educating yourself and still learning about it. And
it's hard. It takes a lot. But people kind of stop at certain points. And that's another thing that happened to me on Facebook, which B and Jen have talked about. So On Facebook, I placed a question, and the question was in relation to an atheist writer named Sam Harris who does a podcast called The Waking Up Podcast, if you don't know it. And he focuses some of his time on Islam, but also sometimes on other political or scientific issues. And I asked, has Sam Harris ever interviewed somebody of Arab background? Because he generally hasn't. And some people actually mentioned some people of real Arab background. They mentioned, for example, somebody like Gad Saad, who is from Lebanon, but Jewish Arab. He speaks Arabic.
Right. Technically,
yeah. I mean, it's not exactly what I was asking, but yes, he would qualify as Arab. And there was another woman who I forget her name, who was I think she was Lebanese Christian, something like that, but from the United States. So kind of Arab background, Christian American. There was Shadi Hamid, I think is his name. Who's kind of a big apologist for Islam, and he's Egyptian American, I think. So yeah, it falls into that category too. Those are three, but these were very few mentions. The large amount of mentions was of mainly people of Pakistani background. A lot of people said like Majid Nawaz, who's a reformer of Pakistani background. They said Sarah Haider, who's a Pakistani ex-Muslim. They said Ali Rizvi, who's also Pakistani and an ex-Muslim, who has not been on the Sam Harris podcast. They mentioned Omar Aziz. Well, that was a disaster of a podcast. It's like notorious disaster of a podcast. He's Pakistani Canadian. And it just keep coming. It wasn't one mention of each of these people. Majid Nawaz was mentioned well over a dozen times. And the scary thing is, Jen, is that the people who follow me know a lot more about Islam and these people than the average person in the West.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like this is not a question placed to the average citizen who knows zero about Islam. These are people in general who spend a lot of time researching Islam, hearing about Islam, so they know quite a bit. And it kind of freaks me out that they don't know the difference between a person who they follow a lot being Arab or Pakistani. And some of the people, even when I pointed out, for example, they said Majid Nawaz, and I said, no, he's Pakistani. They said, oh, but Pakistan is an Arab country. They speak Arabic.
Ah.
For those who don't know, well, you lived in Pakistan, Jen. You say it. How wrong is it to say like one, it's an Arab country, two, they speak Arabic?
First of all,
imagine Nawaz is not from Pakistan, by the way. He's from the UK. By the way,
nobody in Pakistan speaks Arabic.
Nobody, right?
Except maybe the imams in the mosques or the religious scholars. They may read and speak maybe Arabic. Mostly just read.
The main language?
No one is fluent in Arabic. They speak Urdu. They speak Hindi. They speak...
maybe some English?
Yeah. There's and another one, and it's escaping me right now.
But the main thing, another important factor is like, those are the main languages. But Pakistan is notoriously has a high level of illiteracy. Most people can't even read and write in the main language. It's not even close to being a second language for them, Arabic. People don't speak and read in Arabic.
No, they repeat prayers in Arabic because they're Muslim, but that doesn't mean they understand what they're repeating. They've just memorized some words because you have to pray in Arabic. The Quran, I mean, everything that happens in Islam, that's why you take Arab names. But that doesn't mean that they're Arab, and that doesn't mean that they want to be Arab. And if you walked to a Pakistani or an Indian or a Bangladeshi and called them Arab, they would be super offended. Super, super offended. Like the two different parts of the world.
Another person who was mentioned more than once was Miriam Namazi, who has been on Sam Harris's podcast, but she's Iranian, which means she's Persian, which means she's not Arab.
They just see it's like just Muslim brown people. They're all Arabs. I don't.
It just kept going on and on, Jen. Like I was messaging you that night. It just didn't stop. Hours and hours went by, and people just kept naming over. Even though there was people who had mentioned somebody like Majid Nawaz or Miem Namazi, and I'd correct them. I was correcting every single post. They kept doing it. Right? People weren't reading the older post and just like acting like, oh, I know, and posting another one, and it was continuously over and over, overwhelmingly Pakistani or something else, but not Arab. But
why? Why do they think that? Why do Pakistanis get the identity thrown on them by people like that think that they're Arab? Is it the fact that they're Muslim or ex-Muslim that automatically means Arab?
Yes, it is that. It is exactly that. They like people see Muslim and Arab as synonymous. To be honest, I thought this was already a phenomenon. I was aware of this phenomenon with regular Westerners, right? I already knew that. I was shocked to see this from people who follow the Islam conversation online.
Yeah, that's really shocking.
That was
I would
really
expect
troubling.
that for my neighbor, but not.
Yeah, no, these are people who spend a lot of hours online following commentators, whether they be somebody like me of, Arab, Hispanic background, or ex-Muslim, or Muslim reformer, or an atheist, or something like that, commenting on Islam. But here is the problem, Jen. It's a common thing to say among the critic of Islam circles that Islam is not a race, correct? Everyone loves to say this, and it's true, and it's a good thing to point out because so many people have confusion that Arab and Muslim are synonymous, and they're not.
Right.
For example, in my background, they are of Arab background from Palestine, and historically that family was Christian, and they still exist in a certain part of Palestine today. But what happens, Jen, when these people that are commenting on this thread on my Facebook, they really are active in talking about Islam. When they confront a regular Westerner and they say Islam is not a race, and then that person they're confronting starts to ask questions. Oh, really? It's not? So tell me the distinctions. And they don't know? They're going to tell them what? That Pakistanis are Arabs and they speak Arabic? Do you see the problem? Even the people who claim to be informed, the people who like to say Islam is not a race, don't know the differences. That's a big problem. If you want to say that, you got to know the differences. Because identity does matter. It does matter in these cases. For example, Pakistan is overwhelmingly Sunni Muslim. Overwhelmingly, right? The large majority. But Jen just told you the overwhelming majority don't speak Arabic. And actually a huge quantity of Pakistan is illiterate. So they don't... Completely illiterate in any language, right? It's an extremely illiterate country. So, they're illiterate in their main language of Urdu. Imagine how illiterate they are in the religion of Islam, where they go to mosque and everything is said in Arabic and the Quran is always in Arabic. It's not translated to Urdu. It's not like the Bible, right?
Right.
Right. Like in a country to country, you go to a Christian church or a Catholic church in Chile, the Bible is in Spanish. You go to Korea, it's in Korean. You go to China, it's in Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. But a mosque has the Quran in the language of Arabic.
And every service will be in Arabic.
Service will be in Arabic. So does identity matter in that case? Yes, it matters tremendously. Because you put all those things together, it indicates that a overwhelming quantity of Pakistanis don't know a lot about their religion. And they can't even check it. They just going by what the Imam says. That is very different from being Arab. If you're from Saudi Arabia, where there is Mecca, Medina, right, and they're right next to the Kaaba, and Arabic is their first language, they have a different understanding of their religion, right? So
absolutely.
So if you put together the fact that they're in a very important part of the world for the Islamic faith, where people do the Hajj, if you put together the fact that they are considered like the original kind of people of the Muslim religion, right? Because there's that whole factor of like Islam is an Arab
Right.
religion, right?
Well,
It's mostly practiced in Arabic, largely. It's different from Christianity in that sense.
well, it's Arab supremacy as well.
There's a lot of Arab supremacy
Mm-hmm.
in Islam. You put all those things together, the experience of a person in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is going to be very different. And so when you interview somebody from Pakistan versus Saudi Arabia and you ask them about religion, it's going to be worlds apart. Worlds apart.
The Pakistanis are the ones that are the housekeepers, and the Bangladeshis are the ones that are the housekeepers in Saudi that take care of everyone that are treated badly. They don't go there like they're not part of the Arab world at all. They are thought of as lesser and lower than Arabs.
There's a lot of animosity between not just Sunni and Shia, but between like Sunni Asian, for example, Pakistani, and Sunni Arab. There's a lot of animosity and racism between those groups, which is not talked about. But these differences do matter, but it's not that a person's experience therefore is insignificant. For example, a person in Pakistan, like we were saying, like they have all these disadvantages being Pakistani, being in a country that's largely illiterate. Does that mean their experience doesn't matter compared to an Arab? Absolutely not. It's a different experience. It's not lesser. The person I interviewed about Islam and blasphemy laws in Pakistan, that was an excellent podcast. I think that's one of my best podcasts. But but when I think about that podcast, I'm thinking about that this is the experience of a Muslim ex-Muslim person who's talking about blasphemy and Islam in Pakistan. You have to put in that context. He's not talking about Islam in the world. There are, of course, factors that tie them together, right?
Yes.
The Quran and certain practices. I think it would be very hard pressed to find any Muslim sect that doesn't believe that Muhammad didn't receive the Quran from the angel Gabriel in a cave, right? All of them believe that.
No, then you wouldn't be a Muslim.
Right. So that basis right there, that's universal. But then, there's certain things that come later in the life of Muhammad between which hadiths are recognized or not, and et cetera, between Sunni and Shia, where you start dividing the differences. Then there are cultural practices, then everything else, the veils that are used are different, right? You have the burqa in Afghanistan, you have the chador in Iran, et cetera, et cetera. You have all these different veils going on depending on the country. It's all practiced differently, and every single one you have to analyze in an independent sense. But it really is troubling that people are just talking or listening to podcasts with people who are ex-Muslim or Muslim reformer, and they're talking just about Islam. Oh, this is Islam. And they're like, okay, and you're all Arab and you're all the same. And it's all Islam is the same.
Let's go into that even. So all of these ex-Muslims, what kind of ex-Muslim are they? Are they Sufi? Are they Shia? Are they Sunni? Were they raised in an Islamic environment, in an Islamic home?
So this is interesting, Jen. We would have had a very different conversation if I had not just interviewed somebody named Mahad Olad, who's Somali from Africa, right? And he's an ex-Muslim. After I interviewed him, he was surprised by two things. He told me, like, there's two things you asked me that I was really surprised by. He said, one, you asked me what branch of Islam I come from. And he said, second, you asked me about my political beliefs. The second one is not as important because he had been interviewed by BBC and CNN and other news outlets, and they only want to know about his experience, not his politics or what he thinks about politics in Islam. But the first one, he said, that was very weird that you asked me about the branch of Islam I come from. And it's not because it's too personal, I wasn't being invasive. He's just like, nobody ever asked that. I was like, but yeah, isn't it important to point out that difference? He says, yes, but Muslims don't identify themselves as Sunni or Shia or et cetera, Ahmadiyya. They just say they're Muslims because they believe their faith is the true faith.
Yes.
Right? That's why there's this they grew accustomed to just identifying themselves as Muslim. It's not like being a Protestant or a Catholic or an evangelical, where even amongst each other, or when you talk about your religion, you say, I am evangelical, I am a Catholic. Muslims don't say, I am Sunni, I am Shia. They say, I'm a Muslim. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're used to
But
saying it. But go ahead.
it's very important. The
Yes.
differences are huge.
Yes.
Like a Sufi versus a Sunni, it's like night and day. Yes, they have the same Quran, and yes, some of the hadiths are the same.
They don't have the same hadiths though.
No, only certain hadiths they would agree on, but most of them they don't.
Well, the quantity is different as well, right? Like Shia have a lot less valid hadiths. There's less information for them, let's say. And Sunnis have a lot more hadiths they consider valid.
Yes.
Right?
Well, a lot more rules.
A lot more rules. That's why they're more strident and strict about so many more rules in their religion. They have more hadiths to go by, which creates a very different practice of the religion. To be specific, the Shia believe that only the Shahaba, which is the companions of the Prophet, are valid as authentic Muslim hadiths for Islam. The Sunni believe that anyone who was a Muslim around the time of Muhammad, that there's a hadith for, is a valid hadith. So this is separating just the companions of the Prophet versus all the Muslims during the time of Muhammad as being valid. So that creates a huge difference in the quantity of hadiths you're going to have. So it's not just like when people say, it's like, oh no, they just followed a different person in their lineage. No, there are theological, very, very big differences.
Big differences.
And then on top of that, the cultural and country and political differences, if you're from Iran or Saudi Arabia, especially these two countries that are very antagonistic towards one another.
Yes.
So if a person tells you, right, that they're just Muslim, but they're an Ahmadiyya from Pakistan versus they're a Wahhabi Sunni from Saudi Arabia, but they start the podcast just by saying, I'm a Muslim. That's it. And that's all the information you have. It's not bad information. It's not untrue information, but you have to be careful what information it is. It's like listening to a person start a podcast and they say, so you're an ex-Christian, right? And they're like, yes. And then they start going off talking about Mormonism.
Right? And
right?
You're like, no, wait, that's not Christian.
Imagine they start talking about Brigham Young, right? In a podcast, and they're saying, oh, this is typical of Christianity. Like, I'm a Christian and I'm an ex-Christian and my family this and that. But they never mention the fact that they're being specifically talking about Mormonism. Now,
that's a really good analogy.
Now, the problem, like the difference is that people, if they heard that in the West, they know if a person starts describing Mormonism, they're like, oh, wait, that's not just regular Christianity. That's Mormonism. That's a very different thing. So you can defend yourself from that kind of thing. But since people don't know nearly anything about Islam, when a person could be describing Shia Islam and they don't know that belongs to a small minority of Muslims, because Sunnis make up somewhere between 85 to 90% of all Muslims in the world.
Which is why I think it's important that we differentiate between the sects.
Yes.
When we talk about being ex-Muslims. Which is what you and I have been talking about, what you were really pushing.
Yes. It worries me that, like, for example, Sam Harris's podcast, a person I like a lot, Sam Harris. If you follow me on Twitter, I follow Sam Harris a lot and I like him. But I think it is a mistake. And it's not... I'm not trying to be like critical, saying somebody is stupid, because I made this mistake before I was listening. But now I notice now all of us Westerners who didn't really grow up around Islam, we are all making a common mistake where we're not highlighting enough somebody's country of origin, where they grew up, and the kind of branch they grew up in. This would be the difference of interviewing a Mormon in the US, a Catholic in the Philippines, and a Unitarian in Japan. And when you interview all these people, the only thing you're starting with is, I'm a Christian or an ex-Christian or a Christian reformer. No more detail. Would it make sense to say all these people are just Christian? A Mormon, a Catholic from the Philippines, and a Unitarian from Japan? Would that make any sense at all to put all these people in one category and they're just talking and you think you're getting information on Christianity? That wouldn't make no sense. But that's what people are doing with Islam. And it's a huge problem. And that is solely based in identity, that we're not actually focusing on identity enough. And I understand there's a rejection towards identity now. Like, nobody wants to say they care about identity, but no, it's to some degree matters. You got to put it in a larger context. Not just identity matters, but it does matter to a degree.
Well, there's ex-Sufis and Ahmadis and Shias that are going around as ex-Muslims speaking for the entire Muslim community, and maybe not even having been raised in a very Islamic environment even. So, and in a Western environment, so not really aware of the wider world and the Islamic world.
And it's very different, right, Jen? Like, for example, an Ahmadi, right? That is a version of Islam that's kind of like Mormonism, only in the sense that it's like, for example, Mormonism is based on Christianity, but it had a recent prophet that created drastic changes.
Yes.
Ahmadi also has a recent prophet that created drastic changes.
Which is why they get killed, because they're not considered real Muslims by Sunnis and Shias.
Exactly, but people just come into the conversation with that background, that branch of Islam, and just say, I'm ex-Muslim. Yeah. But that would make no sense if you did that as an ex-Mormon and you just said, hey, I'm an ex-Christian. It like, people don't understand. It's that big a difference in Islam too. That took me a long time to get. Right? And I don't see that other people are getting that. And I think it's misleading on other people. It leads to people being asked, has this person interviewed any Arabs? And everybody starts mentioning Pakistanis. That's a problem.
You know what? Thinking about this, when I first started talking online about being an ex-Muslim, because it wasn't it's my identity, it's who I am, but it wasn't something that I was focusing on solely. I was focusing on leaving religion behind more than just Islam or just Mormonism.
Yeah.
And somebody asked me, what sect of Islam are you? Like, or what Muslim? You know what I mean? And I had to stop and I had to think about it. Like, I just called myself a Muslim. I knew I was Sunni and I knew that I had converted into the Deobandi, but I didn't ever talk about that. It wasn't something that mattered. I was Muslim. It was Muslim. It was the entire Muslim community around the world. It was every Muslim.
Well, but it almost makes a little bit more sense, Jen, that you would not distinguish your sect so much in Islam, especially if you're Sunni. Because, for example, Christianity is one of the largest religions in the world. And Islam is just right behind it with 1.5 billion people, right? Mm-hmm. Christianity is very diverse as far as its branches, right? There's no one branch that is so dominant to the point of like 70 or 80%.
True, yeah.
But Islam, despite being a gigantic religion of a huge population in over 50 countries, nearly 90% belong to one sect.
That makes sense. You're right.
Right?
Yeah, because
one
everyone's
sect.
Sunni. You never think about it.
But for the same reason, Jen, when you belong to one of these sects that only occupies like 1% or less of all Muslims in the world, you can't come into the room saying, I'm just an ex-Muslim. Right? Without being more specific. You can't do that.
It's disingenuous and dishonest.
I mean, sometimes, like we're saying, like you could do it unconsciously, I realize now, because Mohad thought it was weird. Right? I understand, like, it's not that it's purely nefarious, dishonest thing to do. It's that you don't think about it. Like, I see a difference there between a person, like if a person did that with Mormonism or Catholicism or you being a Unitarian, I would see it as more nefarious, but I don't see it that way for Islam. I think it's just because in the practice, it's always just, we're Muslim.
Yeah, but that you have a point though. With Sunni, that is true. But like the Shias that I knew made that a point that they weren't Sunni. Like that was a big deal. The fact that they were Shia and that they were separate from Sunni. I never knew any Sufis really, and I never really knew any Ahmadis because they were evil. Like we weren't supposed to ever talk to them. And same thing with Shias, but I had Shia friends.
They're evil. We're not supposed to talk to them.
They were downright evil, man. It was very much a part of their identity. They never considered themselves part of the Sunni group. Right. So as Sunnis would consider everyone Sunni, because there's so many, that makes sense. But for the other group to say, to not think about it and say, well, I'm just a Muslim, just like everyone else, I think it's a little bit more dishonest than you think it is. Knowing.
I see. Like there's so much separation and animosity between, for example, Sunni and Shia or Ahmadi, that if they don't say it, that's weird because they are so conscious of it.
Yeah.
That's what you mean,
right? They really are conscious of it. Really, really.
Like a Sunni might not be as conscious of it because they occupy so much of the population. But a minority that small within Islam that is also just persecuted. And if you have these two people in a room like Sunni and Shia, like there's going to be conflict, right?
Oh yeah,
there's going to be arguing at least. That if they don't bring it up, it's weird. But to mention something else, Jen, also they might not bring it up because they could explain the differences. It's not that complicated. I just explained the difference between Sunni and Shia, something really basic and small, within less than a minute.
I let you do it too. I was really impressed. I was like, wow,
it's good, really right? Good. I'm good, right?
Yeah.
See, I'm learning. Lalo's learning.
So
everyone imagine Jen patting Lalo on the head right now.
Good boy.
Good boy.
So there's no reason, especially if you're a public figure and you're speaking as a ex-Muslim or a reformer or a Muslim that, a feminist or whatever it is, for you not to say I'm different than Sunnis, and they because they're very aware of it. To me, it's dishonest.
Yeah, I mean the problem with that I see a lot that this is significant is that it makes such a big difference in what you're talking about. This is where you're from, what branch it is, that makes a huge difference. There are over 50 countries that are majority Muslim. That's not counting where there are Muslims who are the minority. I'm just like over 50 counts the majority Muslim countries. That's a lot. And that's all over the world in multiple continents, Asia, Middle East, Europe, Africa, many countries.
Yeah. Were you raised in the West? I mean, were you raised with liberal, Western values where you can't just, have revenge rape like in Pakistan, or you can't just kill someone because they said something nasty about your God? I mean, so they're not that you yourself would do that, but that's an environment that you're raised in. That's very different.
Yeah.
And you need to talk about those things. It's very important. Maybe I find it dishonest, but at the same time, maybe they think that Westerners wouldn't know the difference anyway, and they don't think that they could explain it, that they're all kind of...
See, I think, I mean, you can make
I think it's dishonest.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe it's just like they think like people are not going to understand the difference, but it's not that difficult. I mean, you can give like a couple of examples and say that the sect I belong to represents X percentage of Muslims. Because it's very significant, again, when you belong to that minority sect of Islam that is not representative of Sunnis, which occupy the overwhelming majority of Islam, and especially when when those conversations lead to discussions about extremism and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and this radical Islamic practice, if you belong to these sects like, for example, a Baha'i or a Sufi, which are notoriously known for being very passive, right? It's like being a Unitarian in Christianity. It's like
very mystical in their thinking.
Right. You're barely a Christian. It's very vague. It's very just spirituality. It's not like being an Orthodox Catholic. It's not like being a hardcore evangelical or born again Christian or anything like that. It's very different. Mm-hmm. And so you can't say that as a Unitarian, this is Christianity, right? What about the radicals? Well, that's not really Christianity, because in Christianity we believe in this and that, and you're talking about Unitarianism. Like, no, that's really misleading people. Like when you're talking about ISIS or Al Qaeda, you have to talk about Sunni Islam. And if you're not a Sunni, and if you don't, and you come from Shia Islam, you have to, make the distinction. I didn't grow up in that sect of Islam, which is, mine is a minority, theirs is the majority. Theirs is practiced in, for example, in these Arab countries where you'll find a lot of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, etc., like Afghanistan, like Iraq, like Saudi Arabia, like Yemen, like Libya, like all these countries, you'll find those groups there, and they're mostly Sunni. Now, what is the differences between those groups and Shia? And you explain it. And you say the majority of Shias you'll find in Iran, which are not Arab, they're Persian. You have to say those things. You just have to. Right?
I agree.
It's
Well, you're not helping.
You're not helping. You're not helping. You can't talk about Islam in the context of just your upbringing when your upbringing is so marginal. I mean, imagine like some of the people you listen to grew up, 1, as Shia, 2, in secular families, 3, they grew up in the West, and they're talking about, well, this is Islam. Well, no. 1, the majority of Muslims are not Shia. 2, the majority of Muslims are not very secular.
No.
and 3, the majority of Muslims don't live in a Western democracy that have secularism. The majority do not. So you can't, you have to talk about 1 year experience and how it differentiates from the rest of the Muslim world, right? And it's a big Muslim world out there with tons of differences, right? But people often say, well, we can't generalize Islam at all because it's so complex and there's so much thinking. Well, yes and no. There are a lot of separations, but it's relevant the fact that one sect is the overwhelming dominant force of it. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that 85 to 90% of all Muslims are Sunni. That's because Sunnis are so orthodox and pretty aggressive that when there is a reformed version of it, they persecute those people to death or outside of their country.
Oh, yeah. Sunni for sure.
This is why there is a difference between Christianity, that you find more branches in quantity, versus Islam. That's why it's like that. So
identity matters.
Identity matters.
It's not the end all be all.
It's not the end all be all. And it's, I mean, again, I'm not invalidating anybody's experience, where they're from, where they were born, in what family they grew up. You mention all those things. They're valid. They're interesting. What is it to, like, I've interviewed people who grew up in a very secular, non-religious family in Iraq. For example, Lubna Ahmed, who I interviewed from Iraq, her family was atheist. Her mother was an atheist in Iraq, right?
And suffered for it.
Didn't like religion. She grew up with no religion at all in Iraq. And then there's people who grew up in the West in hardcore fundamentalist religious families, right? Or there's people who marry into it, like Stephanie Tessier, right? Or you. There's all kind of experiences out there, and they're all valid. They're all going to be different. They all have their own story. They all give you a bigger picture of what's going on, but you have to make the distinctions.
You can't say that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it's up to the ex-Muslim or the Muslim reformer or the person that's trying to tell the world their story or inform the world about Islam. It's up to them to make the distinction, to teach about the differences. And to not do that is doing it's dishonest. It's doing a disservice.
It is. I mean, more than anything, it's doing a very big disservice. It's not helping because the Westerners really don't understand Islam. That's the typical thing.
No, so it's like you're apologizing for it. Well, no. It's this and this. Islam is this and this, but you're trying to represent an offshoot, a breakoff. Say if you're Sufi, you're trying to represent Sufism as being all of Islam. So it's the dishonesty is there, but you're also apologizing for the worst bits of Islam then.
Right, because you're saying that the violent parts of it, that's not really Islam. It's not like the Islam I know.
Yeah.
Without making the distinction that you're actually the Islam you're part of, that's a really small minority. You're like, to be this is a weird thing to say, but to be a very peaceful Sufi is radical in Islam.
Yes.
Right? Because it's not typical of the majority. It's not representative of the ideology of the majority, which is Sunni. They are radically peaceful, some of the sects. Right?
So if you present it as that's the normalized version of it, then you're apologizing for the worst bits.
I should tell this story. So recently, I went to a Baha'i temple in Chile. For those who don't know, Baha'is are also kind of an offshoot with a recent prophet from about maybe 150 years ago. there was a new prophet in Iran who developed a new branch of Islam. It's called Baha'i.
You know more about this than I do.
I know very little. I just learned when I was there at the temple. I'd like to know.
And you taught me.
I'd like to learn more about it. But the Baha'is are originally from Iran, and they were persecuted in Iran for being this new reformist branch. Like, the only way I can describe Baha'is is like they are the super duper ultra peaceful hippies that there ever was of Islam. Ridiculous. Like, their beliefs are so vague. So like they cut away almost everything. So Baha'is have a big diaspora because they were persecuted outside of the Middle East. So there are Baha'is in Chile, right? And there aren't Baha'i temples everywhere there are Baha'is. They only build a temple, I think, about one in every continent. There is one Baha'i temple. And the one Baha'i temple for Latin America is in Chile. And it's open to people who are not Baha'i, can come, they visit the temple. And my experience was they're not pushy about trying to get you into their religion or anything. They're very nice about just letting you in, just saying, be quiet, and, be respectful, something like that. And then you're just free to like wander around. The Baha'i temple in Chile is gorgeous, Jen. It has like this flower shape where like the walls look like petals, like flower petals formed around it. It is gorgeous. Anyone can Google it. Google Baha'i Temple Chile. You'll see a gorgeous building. But what hit me was when I went inside, there's nothing. There's nothing. It's so barren. Like, there's no symbols. There's no like altar. The place is like round, so the chairs like come around in a circle. So there's no like dominant looking towards one person who is dominant like an imam. There's no symbology around this temple, except when you look straight up, there's one word in Arabic, which I thought might be Allah, but it wasn't Allah, because I asked somebody and they said it was more like, I can't remember, so I'm not going to try to make something up, but it wasn't Allah. It wasn't just God. And then when you go from wall to wall, because there's a pillar for each thing that looks like a pedestal outside, right? And there's an inscription. And Jen, you would laugh so hard if you read each inscription, not because it's funny, but because it's just so un-Islamic thing to say. Like the inscriptions say like, all the prophets of all the religions bring us all together.
What?
Could you imagine such a thing in a mosque? In a Sunni mosque?
No.
And they were all like that. They were all about unification of all the religions, and so they had, so the barrenness of the temple is on purpose. So there's no thing that excludes other people, right? And all the inscriptions are very vague and colorful, and anyone can relate to them. So go ahead.
The word on the ceiling is it like Alhamdulillah or Bismillah, or is it like
I can look it. I was
just curious.
Can I look it up?
Oh, it's the word glory.
Is it? Oh, it was. Yeah. It was glory. It was like glory to him or something like that.
Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah. I don't know how to say that word. It's just basically glory in God.
Right. I think that's what they said to me. So that it's not exactly the typical inscription you would see for Allah. Right?
No, that's why I was curious, because I hadn't really.
That is the one symbol in the temple that you can see that is right above you, and it's transparent, so the light comes through it. So it's really gorgeous. You look straight up in this temple, and it's one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen, I think. But this is an example of a very different offshoot, very peaceful branch of Islam. Kind of ridiculously peaceful, I'd say, like bizarrely. It's like Unitarians kind of thing, that were persecuted out of the country and out of the region. And you can't be part of the Baha'i religion and go on a podcast and just talk about Baha'i and say this is
As if
Islam.
it's Islam.
You just can't do that. And Shias are much closer, obviously, to Sunnis than Baha'i, obviously. There's a world of difference there. But the differences do matter. They do. And it's good to know them. I mean, like a lot of people say, like, can Islam be reformed? Well, there are a lot of sects that have reformed it. Unfortunately, they're really unpopular. They're persecuted. They're spread out all over the world. So the big chunk mass of Sunnis that are dominant and rigid and have all these rules persecute these reformist sects. And that tells you something already. Like, we don't have to speculate about what happens when people try to reform Islam. It's happened multiple times in multiple regions throughout history. We see it. Yep. So study it. That's what I'm trying to do that now. And it's fascinating. I don't need to have all these hypotheticals about like, oh, can we reform Islam? There's been reform of radically peaceful sects of Islam. Right. I mean, more peaceful sometimes than I'd say some of the reformers speak about now, like almost absurdly peaceful. Do you know, for example, the Baha'i, they mix Islam with other religions, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. They bring them all together. It's ridiculous. I laugh because it's like it's kind of obvious why they're persecuted in a Shia or Sunni country. They wouldn't make it. They're not going to make it. You know, they'll be okay in Chile or something.
This is the peaceful reform of version of Islam that's been reformed into, and they have been persecuted and driven out. There you go.
Yeah. So the question is like, there are reformed versions of Islam. Why are they so small? Why is this there is such a huge chunk of one sect? And what is the difference there? Why can't one sect absorb the peaceful nature of the other? Right? And there are reasons for that. There are reasons you can study. We won't get into it now because it'll go on forever. But the point is that these things matter. These differences matter. You have to point out where you're from, what sect you were in, how religious were your family, what kind of community you were brought in. These things are important. So, what else do you think, Jen?
I have a very unique, obviously, my approach to Islam and what I was exposed to is very unique. From the Islam that I grew up with to the Islam I married into to the Islam I experienced living around the world, which just wasn't just my sect and school of thought. Like, it wasn't just Deobandis that I was surrounded with and around. I mean, I experienced the Islam that I experienced, and even the Sunni Islam was in, say, Pakistan was very different from the UK, was very different from the US, like we were talking. So even within like the same sect, the same kinds of people, the culture is so different between immigrants. Say you have the immigrants into the UK from in the 50s and 60s and 70s. The cultures have changed drastically, in some ways for the worst.
Right.
That the things that are important in their version of their Islam is different than what's going on in the other country. So you almost don't recognize it, even though it's the same sect, the same people, the same books, the same everything.
You could have the exact same sect, right? But from one country to another, but because of the political factors, because of the cultural factors, it might look totally different. That's perfectly possible to happen. It could be that they're very similar, almost no difference, or it could be that they're drastically different. It's going to depend, right? And you have to talk to a lot of people, and you have to learn the history of each country. And all this takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. It's not easy because I'm doing it, so I know how hard this is.
Which is why it annoys me when people talk about it like they're experts, and they read a couple things. They don't understand the nuance and the differences in culture and sex, and even
and a lot of these people are ex-Muslim. Just because they're an ex-Muslim does not mean that they got a degree in Islamic studies and they know everything about every country and every sect and they studied it in depth. That does not imply that, and it usually doesn't. Usually people do not know about the religion like every other religion. People most of the ex-Muslims I talk to are not experts on global Islam. And even sometimes they're not even that well read on the Islam they practiced. Some are. Very rarely do I talk with somebody who actually knows on a global political scale Islam. That's a lot of work for anybody. It's usually about their personal experience with their family, with their community, where they grew up, whether it was a Muslim majority country or a Western secular country, et cetera, et cetera. Or if you're a convert like Jen, right, where you converted, but you moved from the West to a Muslim majority country, a Sharia driven country.
Yeah.
And you married into it, and you had kids, and you were in it for a very long time. That's an experience of a kind, right? It's not everybody's experience. So yeah, just all these things you have to take into account. And when you talk to anyone, no matter who they are, even me, I'm not saying I'm an expert on everything. I'm definitely not. I'm just, I'm a novice, but I think I know more than the average person. I'm trying hard, but even I'm going to get a lot of things wrong. And you should even question me. Got to question everybody. But don't just take, somebody says they're an ex-Muslim. Oh, well, then they're telling me about Islam universally. This is just Islam. No matter where country you jump to, this is Islam. That doesn't work that way.
Yeah, question everyone. Anyone that talks about Islam, question their background. Not to be.
Not that they're lying. Not that it's not valid what they're saying, but question in the sense that what is the difference here with this person and their experience with the majority? Does their sect that they belong to, what percentage does this sect belong to? If they're Sufi, what percentage of Muslims are Sufi? What countries do you principally find Sufis in? Ask yourself these questions. This is what we're talking about when you say question somebody. It's not like treat them like a liar. Just dig into what it means to belong to their identity.
Yeah, on top of everything else, it's fascinating. I mean,
it is interesting. It's super interesting.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've learned more since I left Islam about the difference in sects and beliefs, because obviously you're not exposed to it. They're just the bad people, and you're supposed to stay away from the bad people. And like I said, I'd never really come across any Sufis. I saw like the Sufi mosque, and I knew that they existed, but it wasn't anything that was a part of my life or somebody that I came across. So I had no reason to learn about them or know that they even really existed, except for a small little building that I would drive by sometimes.
I mean, that happens all the time in Christianity too. There's all these little sects of Islam of Christianity that you don't really learn about. I mean, if you're in a Catholic majority country, for example, in Latin America, Mormons can be kind of a mystery for a lot of people. Even Protestants are kind of a mystery for a lot of Latinos. There's not a lot of Protestants in Latin America. There's more Protestants in the U.S. than there are Catholics, obviously, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when JFK was running, it was very weird that he was a Catholic.
For some reason that was a big deal.
Right. So even something as big as Protestantism can be very mysterious for people depending on where they're from. And it's going to be very different.
So that's why I'm saying, ask questions, look into people where they come from and how they were raised. If they weren't raised, if they converted to Islam, or what their experiences were. Did they spend a couple years as a Muslim? Did they live in an Islamic country? How devout were they? I mean, those things do matter. And it matters how somebody that was raised in Islam, it matters if they were raised in a secular household, even though they called themselves Muslims. That matters. And it matters if you were raised in the West. And it matters.
Please, everybody, learn the difference between Pakistani, Arab, or Persian, or Kurd.
Oh my gosh.
Please learn those.
It's almost embarrassing if you don't. Like, if you really seriously call a Pakistani an Arab and say, well, they speak Arabic, and you seriously are arguing or making this argument, wow.
That's a good reaction.
Well, also, I think that it really downplays the fact that Christianity and Christians in the Islamic world have been persecuted, Jews as well, and driven out, and forced conversions, and love jihad, and all those things. Those are very real things that happen. and it's why majority Christian countries have become majority Muslim countries. So I think it kind of downplays that, the seriousness of that as well. Just saying, well, if they're Arab, they're Muslim. We're done with that. You know, it just like
yeah, exactly. Okay, well, let's leave it here. I hope it's clear that people need to do more research into this and not just trust everything they hear on one podcast with one person who has, you know, their identity and their background. Identity matters
for everything.
For everything. It does matter, right?
It does, but not, again, like we said, it's not the end all be all.
It's
but
not
for
the
whatever
end all be all.
subject, look up the people that you're looking up to. For anything, look up to, like, if you look up to somebody, look at their background, look at what they've studied, what they've produced. You know, if they're really well educated, and not one person can be an expert in everything.
And add that information, that personal experience from that one person, add with it studying politics, theology, history of Islam, history of the country. There's a lot of things to research. Unfortunately, these subjects are not simple. They're not small. You can't understand it in a single podcast. Trust me, I've done a lot of podcasts and even off podcasts and just personal conversations with tons of people from Muslim background. It's a really hard subject. Really, really hard.
Time consuming.
Yeah. And so you can find us on Twitter at Lalo Dagach, LALODAGACH. And you can find Jen on Twitter at Murtadmili. How do you spell that?
Murtadmilli. And that literally translates to a convert who's left Islam.
In what language?
Arabic.
In Arabic. Oh, see, that's fascinating. And everybody, please, it makes Jen very happy when you send cat gifts to her, especially like crazy cat lady gifts. And when I say it makes her happy, what I mean is it annoys her and it makes me happy. That's what I mean. So please go to her Twitter and send her crazy cat lady gifts. All right? Please, it's like a GoFundMe. Everybody, please go do it.
Instead of money, send cat gifts.
Exactly. That's how you'll pay us. Although we do have a Patreon that will be linked below somewhere. And
Just send both.
Yeah, you can do both. But I'd prefer the cat gifts, to be honest, than the money.
No, send the money.
Send the money. But thank you.
I can't stop. Oh, my mouth hurts.
I'm gonna demonize biotechnology, 'cause that's my liberal philosophy. Condemn the things that I don't understand. At least I've been a partisan, my leftist wonderland. Get out of here, bigots, I don't wanna know ya. I feel your fear of FGM is nothing but Islamophobia. I wanna see labels on those evil GMOs. I think you'll find a real terrorist and them guys at Monsanto. Go, 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 go. I'm so liberal.
You were just listening to an episode of People of the Podcast. You can check us out on YouTube, SoundCloud, and iTunes. Don't forget to subscribe and stop by our Facebook page and give us a like. You can also follow us on Twitter. Links are in the description. And if you wish to contribute, you can donate to us on Patreon. We have a lot of rewards to come, and with your help, we can make better quality content for you. Thank you for listening.